We had theft from ACT Ohio, which was Steffen's nonprofit organization, and from TOPS, which is the Top of Ohio Pet Shelter in Logan County. That was one of the theft counts.
Hi, and welcome to the Animal Welfare Junction. This is your host, Dr. G, and our music is written and produced by Mike Sullivan. This is Season 1, State versus Steffen Baldwin, Episode 5, Taking Tops to the Bottom. This episode is about how Steffen Baldwin entered the Top of Ohio shelter initially as a board member and then became executive director, and everything he did to basically not help the shelter. As always, these episodes contain elements of animal abuse and domestic violence, so please take care of yourselves, and if you need to take a pause, and then come back. This episode is a collection of videos that I had from while we were working with TOPS, as well as some interviews with some of the individuals that worked with Steffen at that time, and then some of the court testimony about Top of Ohio.
In January 1st of 2015, he became the executive director of TOPS Ohio, which they were paying him a $40,000 base salary. So now he had income coming in again, but instead of changing his ways, he just continued to spend the ACT Ohio money on himself while not paying you. So where was that money going? It was going to his life expenses. He was buying his son gifts, Christmas presents, birthday presents, toys. He was buying himself video games, all kind of things, child support payments he was making. He had taken $20,000 out of cash with no receipt or no idea what happened to the $20,000. He filled up his gas with gas marts. He spent like $16,000 at gas stations and gas marts. Fast food, he was somewhere in the vicinity, I think, of like $6,000 on fast food alone. Then he was going to restaurants and bars and alcohol, then dates and his dating life and girlfriends and hotels and overnight stays and vacations. All of this was paid for, 95% with ACT Ohio money.
My name's Erica Tyler, previously Erica Cooper. I was a kennel technician at Top of Ohio Pet Shelter under Steffen. He was our interim director for quite some time, so I worked under him there.
So how about you start by letting the audience know about how you became involved with TOPS?
Oh, yeah. So my grandmother served as board president for quite some time, but from a really young age, like 5 or 6 years old, my grandma and I would volunteer at, the Humane Society before it was even called TOPS. So we always had some level of involvement at helping out at the shelter, rather, she was serving on the board or not. But when I moved back to Ohio from Alabama, my grandma, I believe she was serving on the board at that time, but just not as president, or was at least very heavily volunteering. She wanted me to go work there as a kennel tech, and they were in dire need of staff at the time. So I started there, and it was actually a different director before Steffen.
My name is Randy Schmidt. At the end of TOPS, I was the president of TOPS. But in 2014, a friend who had recently gone out there, Carol, she said, well, why don't you come out and, see the dogs and stuff. And so as it got towards winter, there in the beginning of 2014, they put out a thing that said, the dogs don't get out much. It'd be great if anybody can come out. Well, I don't mind getting Carhartts and boots on and take the dogs out in the snow. And they seemed to really love it. And it was nice because there were not many people out there at the time. So I tried to get them out, about 10, 15 minutes. I had about 8 or 10 of them that were my regulars, so to speak. My major was in marketing from college, so I would basically try to market the dogs. I would come back in, we'd sit in the lobby for a little bit, the dog just sit next to me, and people come in and go, oh, it's a really nice dog. Well, the dog's available, So the joke kind of became after a while, I need Randy to walk me today because I want to get adopted. So 2014 went, pretty fine. And like I told, the judge, I said, I was just out there for the dogs. I was there to walk the dogs. I love dogs, have dogs, and just to get them out and help out, any way I could out there. But I didn't want anything to do with board or control, because I knew a little bit of the history in this county and that it's always been kind of a bit of a crap show. So it was like, I don't want to get into any of that. I'm just here for the dogs.
Tops has a long history, even before it was Tops, of corruption and bad management. And it's always had this sort of gray cloud over its head. The executive director that was serving there had her whole family working there, which I know the board and my grandmother had concerns of like nepotism and things, to have your entire family on the payroll and maybe not having them do quite as much as everyone else. So, ironically, the day that that executive director walked out was the day after Tops was robbed. And the safe got smashed on the floor. And the current executive director actually threw me and another employee under the bus and thought that we had done it. And I was like, I didn't do that. I was at home in bed,
My name is Christopher Anthony DeWitt. I served as board president and as a board member with Tops, roughly a couple of years. Steffen, I met originally in Union County some years before that, working with the shelter here, walking dogs, and then his name came up very often in the dog world, and I got to know Steffen when he came to serve and work at Tops of Ohio. He initially just served as a board member. We asked him, or I asked Steffen to come on. And then secondly, when we had people leave, we needed a leader, a director, and I asked Steffen to do that. Well, Steffen had, in the dog world, it's a very close, group of people. He had a good name. Especially with the bully breeds. And unfortunately, where we're at in Logan County, we have many, many pit bulls. And that's how I knew Steffen. He had a name of being able to work well with the dogs that were special needs. He had the ability, to retrain them, and so that they could potentially have a home again. We had an implosion at Tops, and we lost approximately 5 or 6 staff members that were there. We were reeling, and I pretty much begged Steffen, buddy, please help us. And that's how he came about with that position.
So as 2015 started, they had a big board meeting, and there were some issues with the previous hierarchy, and there was a change made in that particular board meeting. Not very well done either. So at that point, the executive director was kind of out. Steffen, I believe, was already on the board. Well, he was the logical person that was close by to put in as the executive director, supposedly going to be for about 3 months, just to find somebody else.
Most of the people that served on the board were just mom and dad, like my wife and I. We love animals, and we were not savvy with what it was about to run, a facility like that. Steffen had that expertise, and so we all leaned on him, for direction. It was a full-time job, but I understood he had a son, and he and I had talked about having some leeway with, time to be able to take care of his son. And of course I said, we can accommodate that, we'll work that out, but it was a full-time job.
I didn't know him from Boo. I didn't much care what all went on. Heard it was pretty nasty, and I would come in to walk a dog and say, okay, so who's in charge now? Who's doing what? And I would hear his name as now the executive director, and everything went along until well, 2015 was crazy. And at one point in June, we voted to add board members. He asked me at that time, hey, we need to fill some of these board seats and so forth. All right. I'm thinking with my history at Honda and management and so forth and so on, maybe I can help out a little bit and do something, help get things turned around. So we filled a number of seats. That was in June of 2015. I said I would serve as the vice president, but Chris DeWitt, you need to be the president because I don't have the time and I don't have the desire to be president.
And ironically, being robbed is what led to Steffen becoming our interim director, because he stood in after that executive director and her family left. So it's a little ironic in hindsight. I was thinking about that today and I was like, oof.
Did you have any interaction with Steffen before he became executive director?
Not in person. I did follow him on social media because when I'd moved back, my grandma was like, there's this guy, he's helping severe behavioral cases. He's really advocating for pit bulls. And, she spoke fondly of him, which, I took my grandma's word for it for good reason,
How were things when he first started as executive director at Tops?
I would call it optimistic. I mean, we were working on making a lot of big changes for the shelter, a lot of needed changes. There was a lot of remodeling going on. As you might recall, we had Lowe's come in. We did the cleaner, I think our animals were more taken care of medically, and there was a cleaner facility. We remodeled that trailer out there. Scott's Lawn came out and volunteered for a day, along with the big grant we got from Lowe's. And I think we were all optimistic that maybe this was the change that our shelter needed after such a long line of bad management. And I think we were all just old.
I got sucked in by the guy as much as everybody else did. He seemed very professional. He seemed very calm, not get excited.
When he took over, before he took over, he reached out to me and said, hey, because we had been joking about doing a shelter makeover type thing.
Right. Extreme Home Makeover Shelter Edition.
Shelter Edition, exactly. And that's actually, I think, what we were calling it, right? And it was let's go to shelters that need help and then help them with all the things from structural to, management of the animals and health and adoption and spay neuter and all that stuff. So I thought that he was doing a really good job at the beginning because he brought me in and everybody was so welcoming and so open to the changes.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, we got that cleaning solution donated for free by the company, which is a really expensive machine, but everybody thought that they were doing this for the shelter. And yeah, that Lowe's thing, they came in and completely remodeled that shelter to make it into kind of like a little mini clinic.
Yeah. Yeah. That trailer was tailored for doctors on your staff to come do intakes. And I helped with some of those intakes and it was great. That trailer was a big old piece of crap before we touched it, and it was unusable, and it was mostly used for storage. So that was an optimistic time. I think we were all really excited. I mean, I know myself, once you came in, I obviously had zero veterinary experience up until that point. I learned a lot just from being at the shelter, and we learned a lot of behavioral things and things we could do to help the dog. So at that point, it was good.
I remember when I started going up there to look at the shelter, one of the first things that he had me do was look at 3 dogs that had been at the shelter for a really long time and that were aggressive and only a few people could handle. And I want to say that Chuck was the only one that could walk at least one of them. Because they had been there for at least 3 years. It was like a really long period of time. And it was kind of like a sad situation because at that point we're talking about warehousing and the dogs are not going to get any better, right? Like you have a dog that is
Yes.
losing his mind inside of this run, and it lives in that run all the time, and it can only see one person. And when I went to the shelter, he pulled me aside and said, hey, these dogs need euthanized, and he explained to me the reasoning behind it. And I said, absolutely, I completely agree. Like it's not fair to keep these dogs like this. And then he said,
Exactly.
well, but the staff is really attached to the dogs, and I don't think that they understand about euthanasia. So I need you to talk to them about it. And I went
Yeah.
in and I pulled everybody over and I explained everything to them, and everybody was fine with it. And to an extent, some of them were kind of I don't want to say happy, because they were not happy that the dogs were being euthanized, but it was that relief that that poor dog
Really.
was not going to be in a
Yeah.
kennel all the time, and a
Yeah.
tiny kennel. We're not talking about a big kennel in a tiny
Right.
run. And
Right.
I thought, they don't have a problem with it. Like, they're not
Right.
upset about it. So what was this
Right.
whole thing about? And I realized that it's because he wanted it to be my decision, right? Not his decision, because he can fix
Exactly.
any dog. So
Yes.
he didn't
Yes.
make that decision. Realistically, they're
Right.
not his failures. If anything, it's my failures or my recommendations. And that's
Right.
something that I didn't learn until a lot later.
I actually remember two of the three dogs' names. We had Devlin, which was like a blue nose pit bull. It was a gray pit bull. Moose, he was like a black and white stocky pit bull. And I'll tell you, I don't remember the third dog's name, but those two dogs that I mentioned particularly had to go in particular cages outside, because if you put them in like your average like pop-up crate, those dogs would walk that cage, destroy the tray inside of it, walk the cage over to another dog and fight it through the cage. I mean, that is, I didn't understand quite at the time, I don't think, or maybe I hadn't thought about it. Had I thought about it, I think I would have, understood. But when you talk to us about it, it made me think a little bit more about it. And I mean, Devlin had, happy tails so bad from being in those cement cages, and Moose did get walked by one particular volunteer pretty often, but that is no life for a dog to live for, 4 to 5 years. I remember doing it. I remember sitting with Chuck and us sitting out in the shed and being like, we did the right thing, like I remember that day very clearly, even being so long ago.
He would go to these shelters, and like Franklin County Dog Shelter, and even when he got Remy, like he would go to shelters and accuse them of not working with the dogs and just wanting to euthanize them, and he would allegedly rescue them. Did he ever work with the dogs at Tops?
I never saw him work with any dogs at Tops. I try to get out there at least twice a week, maybe 3 days a week, and I would get them out and just play and run and throw snowballs with them and stuff like that. Sit under a tree. I've got one where I'm sitting underneath a tree out there with them and just let them be dogs. I never saw him do that with any of the dogs. I saw him observe some dogs, supposedly, that there were some questions on, but I didn't ever see him really do anything with training any of them or anything. Everybody kind of acted like he was this dog whisperer that, knew all about dogs, and any pits and any others that had questions. He's kind of the guy that decides whether they're retrainable or not.
Because that was his jam. His jam was taking a dog that is deemed unadoptable and aggressive and then rehabilitating it. And I'm of the big belief that you start at home, right? You'd have to take care of your home before you can help somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't feel like he was taking care of his home.
I wrote that down too, because he came in talking this big game, and there's one particular case, Ginger. I don't know if you remember this dog. He was like a red mix of sorts, but this dog was wild. When Chuck and I would try to get him out of his run, he had one of those big double runs in one of the kennels. He would like snap at our hands, and we couldn't get him out, but we begged Steffen, like, please come help us with this dog. Please. We really want to help him. Chuck and I'll do whatever you tell us to do, but we need advice. We don't know what to do. And I don't recall who it was, but somebody was in town visiting Steffen, another trainer. And he was at the shelter, and he said, guys, he said, you take that leash, that slip lead, and stick a hot dog in the middle. He'll put his face through it, and then you loop him. And we did that. We did it every day for probably close 3 to 4 months. And by the end of it, we could get Ginger out like a gentleman. And then Chuck started taking Ginger home. And I have a photo, I actually just ran across it before our interview, of Ginger standing about 3 feet from another dog, which he couldn't do, previously. He was just unsocialized and he needed a little guidance. But I was thinking about those other 3 dogs. Why didn't you, at least try? Instead, he gravitated towards a dog named Codley, who I know lives in a happy home. He's all gray muzzled, he's an old man living his best life. And he gravitated towards Codley, who was also a longtime resident, but couldn't be more dog friendly and friendly towards people.
Let's talk about who you brought with you today.
Sure. So this is Codley. And Codley came from the Top of Ohio Pet Shelter. That's one of the rural shelters that both Dr. Gonzalez with the Rasco Animal Hospital and my organization with ACT Ohio help out. We do a lot across the state, mostly in rural areas, just trying to help animals wherever we can. And there's a lot of struggling shelters, very small rural shelters, and Top of Ohio Pet Shelter is one of them. And Codley just came from there. He actually spent 3 out of 4 years. He's 4 years old. He spent the first 3 years at the shelter. He's only been out for a short while. He developed some skin problems. The hospital is treating the skin problems, and we're working on rehabilitating him and getting him used to being out of a shelter, because 3 years is a long time to be in a shelter. And he's doing great so far. Things are a little new to him, new experiences. First time he's been on TV, of course.
Right. This is his debut, so he's a little nervous. He's got to sniff around, make sure he knows what's going on.
Yeah, I figure he spent 3/4 of his life basically in a rural shelter in a high-stress environment. So he's doing fantastic for that kind of experience. That's just one of the many things that Rascal Charities does, and that we partner with Rascal, with ACT Ohio to do, is just to help animals in need across rural Ohio.
So he showed off Codley on his social media. I have a picture of it somewhere. And, I helped this dog from Tops. You didn't help that dog from Tops do anything. He was already a nice dog, and I wonder a lot of times, now it's so obvious, but hindsight's 2020.
What would you say were the first signs that there was something not okay?
I feel like I had a special in to knowledge just because Grandma was so close to so many board members, which maybe isn't right, but I heard whispers of Steffen acting like he was working more time than he was.
It started out pretty good. He was showing up, but shortly, I'd say within a month's period of time, there were more time away. I was being called at home myself, stating that Steffen's not here. There's no one in the office to run the office. My wife and I would come in, and I'd run the show, basically, with myself and other board members that were coming in.
Okay, so you started getting calls from employees. How frequently were you getting calls to come down to the shelter?
Daily.
Were you there at the shelter on a daily basis?
Yes.
And when you came to the shelter when Steffen wasn't there, how long were you staying?
Staying from 3 to 4 hours, sometimes all day for the entire shift.
How difficult was it to get a hold of Steffen when he was not at the facility?
Difficult. He would not return calls many times, and then when I would talk to him, he would be evasive. He would show up eventually midday and be around for a few hours. Sometimes he would stay until closing. Other times he would leave after a couple hours. He had his own ACT Ohio, and workers had come to me and told me that he was doing ACT Ohio work while being paid on our time clock. And those were things that we would discuss also, that, when you're here, please do what we need done.
So the board wanted him to start clocking in. And I, as a joke one day, was like, I have a question for Steffen. Like, where is he? They're like, he's supposed to be here like 45 minutes ago. I'm like, well, he's not. So I went in and grabbed that poster board of him that says only a punk would hurt a dog, or a cat, and I put it in his desk chair, and I was like, "Where are you, boss? I've got a question for you." And I sent it, like, I think I posted it on Facebook even. I think it shows up in my memories time to time. So, I mean, after that initial optimism, he was there less and less and less. And when he was working on act stuff, or he was on the phone. And, there's a time we were so short staffed that Chuck and I were working 7 days a week for like 3 or 4 months. And he was like, "Oh, I'll come do the cats in the garage, or, I'll come help you clean kennels because, Chuck's off or whatever." And if he'd show up, he'd be on his phone or be in the way. And it's like, why don't you just stay out of here? You're too much in my way. And I think from that point on, there really started to be some issues with Steffen, between him especially and the board, but he was just not there to do his job.
Today, as I said, I received more documents, including this autobiography that Steffen started writing about 2011. I would make an appearance at work, tell the staff I had an off-site meeting and obligations, and would go home and smoke pot while I watched old sci-fi reruns or spent hours passively looking at porn online and masturbating.
Steffen had a huge opportunity to, if he knew so much about animal behavior, to teach us as a staff a lot of things. I think he tried to tell us how to break up a dog fight, but we had already been doing that because we had all these, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs dogs. And he had a huge opportunity to share his knowledge and teach us things and training. And, we could send dogs out the door, maybe more dogs that were more well-behaved than they were. But I don't recall him ever teaching me anything. His buddy that was a trainer taught Chuck and I something. But everything I've learned was from when you started coming with your staff to the tops. And then the following 5 to 6 years that I've been at Rascal, and now I serve on the board and I'm still somewhat involved with Rascal things. And he didn't teach us anything. We learned everything from Rascal, and 0 out of 10 stars. 0 out of 10. I can't recommend.
Yeah, and we started doing one of the things that we started doing to make the shelter more progressive was doing the spay and neuter. And
Right.
One of the things that we were doing was we were getting sponsors for the dogs to get spayed and neutered for free, which
Yep.
was supposed to bring the shelter money and get the shelter animals spayed and neutered for free, and then bring the shelter money for admin fees for hosting us and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And everything was set, and it's the same setup that we do everywhere throughout the state. And yet it was not working out, and I was being told the shelter's losing money.
Well, I do remember I was the one that made the little pictures for the sponsors for the cork board and the Facebook page. And I remember it being a really good idea. I mean, the idea of working at Rascal at that point was just like, ooh, that looks cool. But I remember you guys coming once a month. I remember the pure chaos in the shelter because we had dog cages lining that long hallway. And I don't remember a ton, obviously, financially, because I wasn't involved in the finances. But I do remember hearing whispers of, we're losing money on this. We can't do this as often. And I that's never made sense to me, especially now that I have the insight of how our, the Rascal clinics work and, what the bottom line is as far as what we need to be there. And I mean, if you tack an admin fee of $5 on every public dog that comes in, you can get there pretty quick. It's easy.
Yeah. And, again, it's like the same setup that we do everywhere that we go. And we're going to areas that, don't have a lot of resources, that don't have a lot of funds. And people are able to make a difference in their communities. And somewhere that, especially with the beautiful shelter that Tops was, and the great location and everything else, and the need from the community, and not just the need for the community, but the sponsorship from the community for these dogs that needed fixed at the shelter. I would remember that I would post that list of 9 dogs that needed sponsored, and it would be filled out within an hour. Somebody wanted to sponsor that dog to get fixed.
Full. And to this day, the need is so high here that our clinics, when we are able to have them here in Logan County, fill up in days. And the demand is high. It's still high. I think it'll be high for a really long time. But yeah, I think we had the right idea, but I think that maybe he was screwing it up from the inside, as he seems to do.
Yeah.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Shelby DeLong, previously Shelby Ramsey. I was hired there as the bookkeeper when I was finishing college or close to finishing college. I did everything financial based. When I was hired, they had recently experienced fraudulent activity from the previous people that were running it. So they were just trying to sort out all of the financials in general, and they just needed some help. It wasn't a great financial situation. There were stacks of paper everywhere. I was focused on sorting out and understanding how much it cost to operate, and understand what outstanding bills they had and outstanding debt, to help make everybody aware of the financial situation, and then understand what it would cost for us to continue to operate. When I started sorting that out, I found that like the gas bill hadn't been paid in a really long time. They were getting ready to turn it off. So we had to sort that out. During that time, they had, I want to say the company was called maybe Brentlinger and Associates, doing their payroll. And how that worked is they processed the payroll, and then they would withhold the taxes, child support, things of that nature, so the withholdings from the paychecks. And then we were supposed to write checks for those bills and send them with like the slip that they enclosed. And then that wasn't being done, and that hadn't been done in a long time.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Danielle Ramsey.
How did you become treasurer of the organization?
I was the only one on the board with experience as running the bookkeeper, so I volunteered for the position.
I know you were sworn in as a board member in August of 2015. When did you start as the treasurer?
Around September of 15.
So at that time, who had control of the money or the finances of the organization?
Steffen and Chris DeWitt.
And who was able to sign checks and those types of things?
Steffen and Chris.
Who had the debit cards to the best of your knowledge?
Steffen and Chris.
When you started looking at Top's finances, do you remember what your first discovery was?
Probably how far back in debt they were with their vendors, and then it came to light that they had not been paying payroll tax. I like to match up, when I do my books, I like to match up everything to a receipt when the expenses come in, so that you can cross-reference. So we were missing receipts, the payroll taxes, how far we were behind with the vendors. And then I want to say there was an employee whose child support was not getting paid. So the priority for me when I took over was just basically caring for the pets. So you have your payroll that you have to pay, the payroll taxes, and then anything involved with the pets as far as their day-to-day expenses. So their shelter, their care, food.
So in my investigation of then going back and looking at all the Tops records, he started stealing in August. So the second bookkeeper didn't catch that one. So he had stolen from them buying Facebook ads. She was on the ball. She actually contacted Facebook and wanted proof of all these purchases that he was making, because then in the end, when the results came back, he had made more. And I think there were 5 total purchases for Facebook ads. But she originally had only caught him on that one before that emergency meeting after he resigned. And then she got the records back like in May, like we're talking 5 months later after he resigned, that showed that he made all these purchases. None of them were for Tops. All of them were for Act Ohio.
Do you remember the situation with Facebook ads?
There were significant charges that were coming from Facebook. So I did question Steffen what they were for. And I was told that they were like to boost posts for different events that the shelter was having. We're a rural community, so I did not think that the boost should cost that much. So I did reach out to Facebook directly, and Facebook sent back screenshots of the ads that they were not for Tops of Ohio.
And who were they for, these Facebook ads?
One of them was for ACT of Ohio. I don't know if they were all for ACT. I know they were boosting other events not related to Tops.
And how much was the amount of money that he owed Tops?
$452.68.
She's there a month and a half and catches him, making a purchase in Warren Township, Michigan for a GoPro. Like, why are you buying a GoPro video in Michigan? How is that a Tops? How is that a Tops item? And then he claimed the purchase of the GoPro was that, Tops's credit card looks just like ACT Ohio's credit card. So I accidentally used Tops. And she's like, okay, well, you have, you need to pay it back. And he agrees to pay it back. The purchase he made of the GoPro, he gave the ACT Ohio card first at the Walmart in Warren, Michigan, and was rejected due to lack of funds, and then gave the Top of Ohio shelter credit card and then purchased the GoPro with that. So his stories of making a mistake of the credit card was not true. He knew exactly what he was doing because his credit card for ACT was getting rejected. Then he would use the Tops to pay for it. And none of it was for Tops of Ohio. So then we found out that he had somehow he had put $1,300 of Tops money. He had charged a cat that it was an ACT Ohio cat, and he had charged it to Tops, but it was an ACT Ohio cat. So they caught it again. They caught him. Hey, this $1,300. It's not one of our animals. It's an ACT animal. You need to pay that money back. So this is a complicated story here.
So I want to talk to you also about a $1,300 charge from Rascal Animal Hospital.
So there was a cat that the shelter got a call on, I remember, that needed medical care and was taken over to Rascals. And Christina Beery at the time was the Tops office manager, and she denied acceptance of the cat. I'm not sure how that came about. But then all of a sudden I got an invoice from Rascals for the cat. So Christina brought it to my attention that she was aware of this cat and that the shelter had denied it and was not taking responsibility for this cat.
How much was the invoice that you got?
It was about $1,300.
So what did Tops do with that $1,300 charge?
I confronted it to Steffen, and Steffen said that ACT of Ohio was taking on responsibility of that cat and that he would submit for reimbursement for that $1,300. Instead of him writing a check, though, for the $1,300 back to Tops, the agreement was that he would pay for apply $1,300 to the next spay or neuter clinic that came.
So he says, okay, well, I'll just pay them the $1,300. Then you guys don't have to pay her. That'll take care of that. So then he writes your business a check for $1,300 and then writes on it for spay neuter in the notes section and deposits it into the Tops account at your place, because you had a Tops account as well for the spay and neuter clinics that you were doing. And then he then notifies them that he paid the $1,300 back to you guys and that, Tops was good. A couple of days later, he calls up, I believe, Michelle Scott, and says, hey, I made a mistake. That money should have been put into the ACT Ohio account, not the Tops account. So she rerouted that deposit from Tops. Tops thinking they're getting their $1,300 that they owe you paid. He now reroutes it to his account in ACT Ohio, and then never does pay Tops back. So that's how that story ended up. And then you ended up losing that $1,300 as well.
Tops get paid $1,300 from ACT or from Mr. Baldwin?
No, when I called Rascals, they said that $1,300 credit was applied to ACT of Ohio's account, not Tops.
So the early September was like $114 ad for Facebook. And for a GoPro video that he bought in Michigan. So a month goes by, it's the end of October, he hasn't paid it back yet. And she gets upset. So she sends this private message, email out to all of these TOPS members stating, hey, he's taken money. I confronted him with it. He's supposed to give it back. It's been a month. He hasn't paid us back yet. So she called a secret meeting or an emergency meeting to have him come to the board and explain these purchases to the board. And then then there was like offshoots of other private emails between board members of like, okay, can we fire him? Can we vote him out? And so we're talking about getting him voted out or firing him as the executive director. So he that day sends her a check and pays the money. So that kind of quells that part of it. So then they have their meeting that night. They don't make him explain anything. He paid it back, whatever. They accept his reasons. One of the things at TOPS is that, there was a freeze on the money, that there was no more spending because they had to pay the IRS. And that was the number one goal at that point in time. And you were contacting him about, hey, we need some on your bill. Can you pay us? Because, you've got to meet payroll and he owed you a lot of money and you guys, you needed some kind of payment. And I think TOPS owed you like $7,000 and he at that time owed you like $16,000. And so then he goes in and pays like several $1,000s from TOPS, even though there was a freeze on the money was by their bookkeeper, and it was agreed upon by everybody that no more money would be spent on anything except for essentials for the animals and paying towards the bill that they owed the IRS. And that then the attorneys too were also, Ohio's attorneys were also the attorneys for TOPS, same attorneys, and he owed them money as well from Act Ohio. And he owed them money as well from TOPS. So then he paid them a few $1,000s too, to satisfy you, to satisfy them that you guys got some payment. Neither of you could care less. You just needed some payment from one or the other because both places owed you thousands of dollars, owed the lawyers thousands of dollars. But he then went to TOPS and he paid out of TOPS account. So I want to be clear that he didn't pay what TOPS money for what Act Ohio owed either one of you. He just used that as a way to keep you guys satisfied, didn't care what problems that caused TOPS, which caused them problems, which would cause an immediate meeting.
The email below was sent out on 10/16/15 to you and Chris notifying you the funds for the shelter were running low, manageable but low. As at that point in time, we were waiting for the check for the county for $7,000. I indicated that I am only keeping necessary accounts current as we needed to make sure we could cover payroll. I'm concerned as to why Rascal Units was paid $3,676.12 on 10/23/15. I was specifically holding this bill as we do not have the funds to cover it. Why was this payment not mentioned at the board meeting when I was talking about paying the back taxes? Unfortunately, taxes get paid prior to Rascals or any other vendor. I am also a bit concerned on why an additional bill was paid on 10/26/15 to Holland and Murden for $2,023.38. These payments have severely drained our funds and should not have been paid.
At the emergency board meeting happened. What were the board members' decisions about these two payments? Do you remember?
They agreed that they were not necessary payments.
And Mr. Baldwin actually resigned his position at TOPS, correct?
Correct.
So one of the things that I want to explain is why it was such a big deal for us that TOPS was not on top of paying us for our bills. So the way that the Rascal unit works is that the hosting group, so in this case TOPS, would schedule the appointments and they would collect the money from the clients for the surgeries that were being performed. So TOPS was basically holding our money that the clients were paying them. And then on the backside, we were helping fundraise to pay for some of the surgeries of the animals from TOPS. So in general, TOPS should have been making money. So they're collecting our money, and every single clinic that we travel to, at the very end of the day, they write us a check for the clinic. And that's in our contract. That's how it works for every single place that we go to. And that was explained to Tops. I mean, Stefan was aware that that's how this worked. And the first few clinics, this was working fine. And then all of a sudden it was, oh, they didn't leave a check. Oh, they left a check, but it didn't have the 2 signatures. Like there was some weird excuse. And it was really upsetting because we were working at a deficit. And our biggest problem, our biggest concern has always been payroll. We want to make sure that the employees are paid, every payroll as they should for the hard work that they're doing. So they're holding our money that the people paid for our services, and then they're not giving us our money back. And he never explained to us that the board was refusing to pay us because of the IRS tax, the taxes and the past due amounts and all of that stuff. So he is telling me that the issue is that somebody didn't leave a check, somebody didn't sign, that it's all just lack of responsibility, when in reality there are all these conversations, and in the background they're thinking that we're basically costing them money because they don't have money to pay us, yet we're going there and providing a service that is coming out of their pocket. And it wasn't. The clients were paying up front for the services that we were providing.
I worked there up until Stefan's exit and then the very beginning of Barbara Faulkner being our ED. And I think she's the one that finally, I think we were having rascal clinics up until Stefan left, right? Or is that accurate?
Mhm.
And then Barbara kicked us to the curb.
Right.
Okay. I worked there until about a month before the shelter closed. They didn't give the staff very much notice. I think for me, it was heartbreaking because it was a place I spent a lot of time since I was a really young age. But if you would have asked me if I thought Stefan had anything to do with us closing then, I would have said, no, I think he was a bad manager, but I don't think it's his fault. But seeing the court documents come out is just a different level of yuck.
The hierarchy that was in there before Stefan, they set a lot of things into problem mode. And again, it just made it a very attractive situation, I think, for somebody like Stefan, who's a master manipulator to begin with,
But we had a big problem with still housing dogs that didn't need to be adopted out. In that transition between Stefan and Barbara, there was a lot of turmoil with the board.
And as turmoil will have it basically, it feeds to that type of a situation for somebody like him to take advantage of. Come December of 2015, the board meeting, Chris had stepped down in November as far as president, and which then put me in the position of being president, but that would have to be voted on in the meeting in December. The meeting in December brought both factions into the meeting room, and all of a sudden everybody shows up for this board meeting other than just the board people, and it's absolute chaos. I've never been involved with anything like it. And have this Chuck from back in the back of, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid. I'm not asking you to be afraid of me. What am I here sitting here threatening you or anything? It was just absolute chaos. Well, what happens? And I told Officer Conroy about that. I said, Chris DeWitt had already resigned as of November, but he wanted to stay on the board. Stefan then steps down at that December meeting. So both of them are gone. And everything's in chaos. I said, I always had my questions of if the two were together, if they were in cahoots together, they both knew what was going on. So therefore they both quit at the exact same time, because that's when Chris said, I'm off the board. And Stefan goes, I'm out of here. So both of them walk at the exact same time, and in this huge chaos. And I said, it just made me wonder at times, who knew what, who was maybe protecting what or wasn't protecting what. And again, I told him, until the trial, I really didn't know, as we talked, was Steffen basically using Chris as a patsy, which is what Jim said. As it turned out, I said, well, you see what I told you about. I couldn't really tell what was happening there. He goes, yeah, I get it. He said, but I think you had it figured right. I think Steffen, being the smooth talker and everything, basically used Chris as the patsy.
Steffen had a lot of turmoil with other employees. I think I might have been in Alabama or something visiting, but I know Steffen showed up to the shelter and was acting kind of aggressive and had his service weapon, and there's a couple men there that had an issue with him already, and I think that just went sour. So I think there's a lot of turmoil between him and the board. But
I was going to, I think, a funeral up in Cleveland the one day, and Christina calls me. Steffen evidently had his badge on when he came in, had his gun. And then
this was the day after the meeting, right? That he came in to get his last paycheck or something like that.
I think so. And Christina's calling me. I'm on 71 heading to Cleveland. I'm going, well, I can't, can you, call the cops if you have to, do whatever you got to do. Because, Chuck, unfortunately, was somewhat not always, he might have been imbibed once in a while when he was at work.
The next day, I'm pretty sure it was the day after that board meeting, that he shows up at Tops, and he was standing up front, dressed up as a humane officer with his gun on his holster. And the people inside of Tops were really concerned because they said that he looked like he was crazy. And he texted me and said, oh, they're making this big deal out of it because I'm wearing my weapon that's part of my uniform as a humane officer. So he, and yeah, I had no reason to doubt it. Like, I was like, okay, I guess he's allowed to have a gun. But realistically, he was doing that to intimidate these people, right? Like, kind of like, here I am, and I'm here to get what I want, and I'm wearing a gun, so what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. Yes, no, I agree with you, because the police report was made of that incident, and he did downplay it to you and to other people he talked about in his messages. They're making a big deal, but there was a report filed on him he did, frighten people that day, because he did get into a shouting or screaming match with one of the employees. So a report was filed on him. He was again contacted by the Logan County Sheriff Department. Then he came in and he made a written statement. And in that written statement, and again, these are the things that we use in charging him, he stated, I was carrying a firearm as part of my, as part of my duty in uniform, as I'm allowed to according to Title IX, which was complete BS. And none of that's true. He's not entitled to carry anything, but he actually wrote that in his statement to Logan County Sheriff's Department about that incident. That was why I had my firearm on, because I was acting, in my position as a humane agent for Union County. I just came to drop off keys, and that was it. But then I talked to, interviewed the people from Logan County and said, hey, how often, did he come with that gun on? Oh yeah, all the time. He came all the time. It wasn't just that day. It was whenever he came.
I remember I received a phone call that day from Chuck, and he said, Patch, you'll never guess what just happened. And I'm like, what? I thought maybe a dog had gotten out and he had to chase it around the shelter, something silly like that. Steffen just showed up here with his gun, I was like, oh my. He's like, you should have seen it. I said, I wish I did. Because people bring that up all the time, and they're like, do you remember that? I'm like, I wish I did, but I wasn't there, but I've heard all about it many times, especially Chuck. He loves to talk about that.
So what happened afterwards?
These dogs that we had, I remember specifically one was a Corso from Indian Lake, and the dog warden brought her in. I don't remember which, but it lived in one of our outside kennels, but it had like shelter and a dog house and food and water. And this dog finally got to the point where you couldn't go in the cage and turn your back on it or it would lunge at you. And the day I quit, I went out there, I went to try to feed the dog, and I couldn't even open the cage. I walked up front and I said, you know, this dog's a liability. It's got to go. Like we can't feed it. I said, are you going to go back there and feed it? And Barbara at the time said, no. And I said, then I quit, and I dropped my keys on the desk and left. And they also had RTC in there helping us clean kennels to try to help with the short staffed. And I know you're not from Logan County and people listening might not know, but RTC is a program or a 501c3 organization we have in Logan County that employs people who are disabled so they can work. And they usually travel with like a buddy, that can help them work. And I was like, this isn't safe for people that don't know anything about it, not to mention someone that's disabled and maybe not strong enough to handle some of these dogs. And that's not your choice to make, Erica. And I said, well, you know what is my choice to make? I quit. And I looked for work for about 2 weeks until I sent somebody a message over at Rascal and said, hey, I need a job. Okay, can you come in tomorrow? Yep. The rest is history, I suppose.
And one of the problems that happens with, Union County, he had this really long time at Union County and things were not what they seemed to be, but nobody knew that. So he goes to top of Ohio and they take him at his word because he spent all this time with Union County and look at the great things that he says that he did there. So they take him into Tops and he destroys Tops, but still nobody really knows about it. And this is dangerous because these are not the only places that he was trying to do things with. We're going to talk now to another director who he kind of tried to do something similar, and she had no reason to know otherwise because, he was at Union County, he was at Logan, he has this great social media presence, so he must be doing something right.
I am Jen Thomas, and I am the executive director at the Ross County Humane Society in Chillicothe, Ohio.
Can you tell us about your experience, like when you first, Stefan, like what was the circumstance that you guys come in contact with him?
So I started on the board of directors as a board member in 2013 or 2014. At that point, I was solely responsible for, as a board member, finding and making rescue connections, whether that be other shelters with rescues, other things. And so that was primarily what I focused on doing. I took over as the director in August of 2015, and somehow I got connected with Steffen, and I don't remember who made that connection for us, but the whole idea was that he was going to come to our shelter and see what we had going on. And at that time, we had a really big money crisis, meaning we were spending way more money than we were making. And he presented himself in a way that he could help us with the dogs that we had, which at that time was well over 100 dogs in our facility, which is too many. And with figuring out ways to fund things. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we paid him to come and speak to us. And it was after hours. Several of my board members came. There were several members of the public that came. And he was very charismatic. He just presented himself in a way that made us think that he knew what he was talking about. So that was my really first experience with him. I think during that visit, I remember him walking through the back, and we had, there's 50 dogs in the back, a lot of dogs, and a lot of them had been there for a while, probably too long. And we were asking him, like, do you think you can help these dogs? And like his biggest sentiment was, all of these dogs can be helped, but I can't help them, but they can be helped. And so we kind of were a little starstruck almost by him, but he really didn't give us any like information about like what we could do. The only thing he really recommended was bingo. He was like, you need to do bingo. He's like, that's how we fund everything, like do bingo. And I think he might have told me Rascal as well. And now that I'm thinking about it, he was like, you can charge people twice what Rascal charges you and you can make money, and then you still get animals fixed. And that may be how we got connected with you, honestly. But yeah, we were, I was dumb. I was new. I didn't know. I trusted him, and we needed money, and we needed to figure a way to get out dogs, but I didn't realize until shortly after that some of the things that he was doing or maybe suggesting probably wasn't going to be in the best interest of the dogs.
Yeah, I remember that he had reached out to me and said that he met with you guys and that you were looking into restarting the spay neuter program because we used to go to Ross County before you got there, and then
Yeah.
things were not very good, and we stopped traveling there.
Yeah.
And then we came back. So so he's kind of like giving you these ideas that are not really leading to much anything. So did he follow up, or what happened after that?
Not really. He didn't really follow up. I had reached out to him several times afterwards about different difficult dogs that we had. And I started following him on social media, and there were several things on there that I personally started to notice that made me uncomfortable. A lot of the dogs that he was taking, he would have pictures of them with his kids, like in his house or on his porch with 14 other dogs. And I just was like, I just feel like this is not a great situation. And I didn't know any of his training methods. He didn't talk to us about that. But beyond that, the only other thing that he really pushed was he he wanted to I believe he wanted to bring a camera crew at one point. I think he was trying to start a reality show. And I feel like we were a means to that end. Like we were this poor shelter who didn't have any money and had all these dogs and a new person who didn't know what they were doing. And he was going to come in and he was going to be the savior, which truthfully, if that had happened and it worked out, I would be very grateful for him, but that's definitely not what happened. He basically got whatever footage he was going to get from us, and then that was kind of the end of it.
So looking back at everything that happened, were you surprised when you found out about the things that he was doing?
I think I wasn't as engulfed as some other people were, so I wasn't quite aware of some of the I'm assuming those are now they're convicted, the money issues. I was not aware that those were happening. I wasn't aware of some of the things, but like he just was saying things that as I got a little bit into, I realized were not possible or were not true. Like there, you can't rehabilitate every single dog. And like I feel like he set that expectation, speaking to my board, that like if we just tried a little harder, we had more people who were like him, that we would be doing better than we were doing, which wasn't the case. So I think, I remember one of my board members saying this was a dog that we'd had for a while, and he, kind of looked at him like with like pleading, like, are you good? Can you help this dog? And he basically was like, no, there's nothing I can do. And I'm like, why are you like, why are you here? Like, what is it that you want from us? We don't have any money. We already paid you to come here and talk to us to tell us to like get bingo and go to Rascal. Like those were the two main takeaways that we took from him.
I'm assuming overall you're like happy that it did not really work out with him, so you guys did not get, suckered by a lot of the stuff that he did, right?
I mean, I am. I'm really glad. I feel stupid, honestly. Again, I was new. I'd never worked in animal welfare. I'd never worked in a nonprofit. I came from a banking and insurance background, and I just happened to love animals and ended up being good at what I am doing. Um, I thought I went to the bingo, like the courses that you have to take, because I thought like this man knows what he's talking about. Like look at all the stuff he's doing, and like you look back on it and you're like, what were we thinking? Like it makes me feel really stupid, and it makes me feel really used, because like I said, I feel like he used at least the situation that we were in as a jumping off for him to further his agenda of helping people but not really helping, if that makes sense. So I'm glad we didn't get any further. I know there probably are other shelters that did, but we just were, I'm like, there's not anything that he's suggesting we do aside. I want to say he wanted to come back and he wanted us to pay him something else, but it's been so long ago that I can't remember. And I looked through a lot of my stuff. I tried to find some pictures that we had taken the day he was there, but like the people that were there treated him like a celebrity. Like we thought it was a big deal, and now I look at it, I'm like, we were dumb. Like he really just fooled a lot of people, I think, and especially people who, in my situation, I was so desperate to like make a difference because we were doing so poorly in many aspects. And I have him and I think, wow, look at all the great things he's doing. He can save all the dogs and he has all these resources, and he really didn't have any. He was just a fraud.
Right. So what did you learn about this experience?
I feel like there are a lot of really great males in the animal shelter and animal welfare. There are a few. The rest of them that I have met have ended up being very much like him, which I won't name names for anybody, but I feel like sometimes they're in it for the wrong reason. And I'm just a lot more cognizant of people who tell me like that they can fix everything, because they can't. You can't save every dog. And I think somebody in the rescue community that's touting save them all at, at that time I thought, well, that's great. Now I'm like, that's really unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the staff. It's unhealthy for the dogs. It's unhealthy for the community, and it's not realistic. So, I just look at people a little bit more carefully when we're choosing to work with them or look up to them, just because I know more now, and I don't want anything that we do to be impacted by somebody who truly actually doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was the problem with social media and everything that he was sharing.
Our community treated him like a celebrity. The women in the dog women, they were just like, oh my gosh, he's so great. I'm like, I mean, he's mid at best, but he's not really providing anything to us, and he wants something from us. He wants to come down here and film something for himself, and we're going to get nothing from it. He's going to benefit from it. So it just, at the end of the day, I feel stupid for even looking up to him at any point, but you don't know what you know until you know it. So
Like, there was no good way of verifying that things were right or wrong, right? It was just all literally from him saying, I did this, and then people telling him how great he was, so we're doing it, and then him just sharing and sharing and sharing. But I don't know that anybody really vetted the stuff that he
no,
was
and
saying.
I feel like that happens a lot, honestly, in dealing. Like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've dealt with some amazing rescues and some amazing shelters, and I've dealt with some shelters that are, have a little bit that they could learn, and some rescues that are also not great. And so I don't think, I mean, there should be some sort of a vetting process in place somehow. I don't know what that looks like. That's beyond my scope of doing. However, the length at which Stefan was able to go, I think, should not have been able to happen. And there are numerous people on my Facebook feed who are like, no, he's not what he says he is. And then there were, 85 more people were like, oh my God, he's so great. When in reality, he just, he wasn't. Was he ever great? I don't know. I don't know. Like, was his goal the whole time to just be on TV? Was that or did he care at some point? Which still doesn't make what he did right, but how do you get into this if you have no desire to actually do good?
Yeah, I think that we're all learning that when somebody comes in and says, these are my qualifications, or this is what I have to offer, or whatever, then perhaps we do need to take that extra step to say, show me why, right? Like, show me where you learned this. Show me where you got this training or information or education or whatever, because that was a big problem. He literally talked a big talk, but he did not have anything to back it up.
There is a large discrepancy between what the community wants us to do and what training is available to people to have. I had zero training when I started here. I definitely don't consider myself an expert by any means. However, I've been doing this for a while, and I've made a ton of mistakes, and I've tried to align myself with people that I do respect, that are doing it for the right reasons. And we've, kind of discovered, like, there's not a set path from doing good and just not having the resources to finding somebody that's trained and knowledgeable to help you in a way that is useful. And I think that those things, if there was more of a standardized way for us to say, okay, these are the qualifications that you need to have or you have to get in order to do what you're doing, I think that might make things a little bit more transparent, because I'm sure that there are other rescues out there that are not great too, that people think are amazing. And, there's no way for us in the sheltering world to say anything without being ostracized by people who think that they're also great, if that makes sense. Like, you don't want to be the odd man out. You don't want to be the shelter that other people don't like because you've gone against the grain, because you just don't feel right about something. And so I think if there was a way or a course or something to say, Jen went through this course for leadership, or Jen went through this course for animal behavior, or Jen went through this course, which, I mean, what do you have to do to become a humane agent? You go through like a week-long class, I think, and that's pretty much it. And then who monitors it after that? Who's in charge? It's nobody. So
Yeah, I think he hurt rescues and shelters in the lies that he made, because he was trying to push this agenda that every dog could be saved. And then he was saying that he was rescuing these aggressive dogs and he was rehabilitating them because he cared and he gave them time, which then makes every other shelter that does not have all these success stories sound like they just want to kill dogs. And in reality, he was the one killing the dogs.
I felt like and this still happens because there's still people out there who are like, you can save every single dog. You've seen them, I'm sure. I just felt like if I tried harder, I could do it. Like if he's doing it, like if he can do it, I can do it. That's just my mentality in life in general. I think there are very few things that I can't accomplish if I try. And I'm like, why can he do this? And he's a singular person and I can't do it. And I have the support of a community and a staff and, volunteers and fosters. Like, what am I do? Like, I took it as a failure on my part because I felt like I should be able to do what I felt like we should be saving more dogs than we were saving. And at that time, we were saving a lot of dogs that in reality probably should not have been saved, either from a humane, ethical standpoint of us just keeping them too long because, there was never that conversation with him of the person I looked up to that said, okay, well, you've had this dog for 9 months. It doesn't like other dogs. Like, have you ever thought about letting it go? Those conversations never came up. Those were, if you try harder, you'll find someone. So, I mean, it was a failure on our part. And, my board members were there and, they hear that. And I'm like, well, now they're, they think I'm just not trying hard enough for the 40 dogs at that time a year we were euthanizing. And it just, it made everybody feel almost worse, I think, because I'm like, why can't we do this? Like, where's our support? Like, he's doing these things. Like, why don't I have that? So.
Yeah. And when he took over executive director at Tops, one of the first things that he did was euthanize 3 dogs that had been there for a long time that were aggressive dogs. And it was kind of like one of the most hypocritical things, on his part, because he's telling people you're just not trying hard enough. And then in his own shelter, he did not even try.
I didn't have a huge experience with him. I felt like because I wasn't a single person, that I wasn't his demographic. And does that make sense? Like the ladies in the rescue community that were single were like, oh my gosh, she's so great. And I think he enjoyed that attention. And I didn't give him that type of attention just because I had my own agenda. I was trying to get better at what I do.
When we talk about Tops, it's like it's not just about his role as a shitty executive director. It's about the animals that were in there that he harmed. It's about the money that he stole. It's about the people that he lied to. It's about the money that he deflected outside of there. And then like there's so much to everything that it is hard to keep everything just organized. There is no organization. And that fits well with him because he was not an organized human being. Right? He was like scattered. So
yeah, so he thrived in chaos. And I think that was a strategy of his because he didn't like meetings, he didn't like reports, he didn't like documentation. And I just think he figured it out. If he just causes chaos, that he can get away with all of these things, and that works.
I think, in fairness to Chris DeWitt, he was just way over his head against a very polished con man. And what I've heard he's done and what I know that he's done and what I'm hearing might be done, none of it really surprises me. It's certainly kind of tarnished me ever wanting to help at a rescue again. And I know that's not right because, again, they're for the dogs, but that was such a negative experience. It just went on and on and on. You've seen it in Little League Baseball. You've seen it in so many nonprofits where people just can't keep their hands out of the till. The IRS, we had every dollar pretty much accounted for. And it's just a shame that they get people into these nonprofits and they just can't do what's right. It's a shame. And it hurts. It does. It hurts everybody. It hurts everybody. It hurts the nations. It hurts the whole thing. It's a shame.
Shelter in Bellefontaine that needed about $170,000 just to stay open. Well, today the shelter is officially closing. So what happens to the animals?